Welcome to my channel, my friends. Have you ever tried to speak English, but your brain went blank and your mouth stayed silent? You study, you watch videos, you memorize words, but when it's time to speak, nothing comes out. Today, I will tell you about the English that changed my life. The moment everything finally started working. Comment below, does this happen to you when you try to speak? Chapter 1. The day English felt impossible. I still remember the first time English made me feel small. I was sitting at my desk in school, and the teacher asked us to read a short paragraph. It looked simple to everyone around me. Their hands went up, and they smiled like it was easy. But I sat frozen, hoping she would pick someone else. The letters on the page looked familiar, but the sounds they made were strangers. My heart beat fast. I pretended to understand. I pretended to follow the words with my eyes, but inside, I was lost. I prayed the teacher would not call my name. I prayed nobody would notice that I didn't understand anything. When it was my turn, I stood up slowly. The book felt heavy in my hands. I looked at the first line, and my mind suddenly became empty. I could read the words in my head, but when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. I heard giggles behind me. I heard whispers. I felt my face burn. I forced myself to say something, but my voice was shaky. The sentence broke into pieces. Every word sounded wrong. I wished I could disappear. The teacher tried to help, but her voice felt far away. I just wanted to sit down. That was the day I told myself, maybe English is not for me. I thought other students were born gifted. They raised their hands. They answered questions. They laughed after class, repeating English words like they belonged to them. I looked at them and wondered if I was the only one who didn't understand. I believed something was wrong with my brain. I believed I would never speak. When the teacher wrote new vocabulary on the board, my eyes followed it, but my mind refused to remember anything. The words felt like secret messages. Everyone else seemed to know how to decode them. But I was standing outside the window, looking in. At home, it did not get better. We had English homework. My classmates finished in minutes. I spent hours staring at the page. I repeated the words again and again, but each time they slipped away like sand through my fingers. I tried to copy the letters, but the shapes felt unnatural. When I listened to English on TV, the characters moved their mouths quickly. The sounds went past me like a fast train. I couldn't catch anything. I felt like someone trying to swim in a deep ocean without knowing how to breathe. I watched their lips, but the meaning never reached my brain. I thought maybe learning English was only for smart people. Maybe some people were born with a special brain.
My parents told me, just practice more, but they did not see how much it hurt. They didn't know that every time I opened the book, fear came first. They didn't know that when teachers asked me to speak, my throat closed like a locked door. I wasn't afraid of English itself. I was afraid of being judged. I was afraid of looking stupid. I was afraid of hearing people laugh at my mistakes. It was not the grammar that scared me. It was the silence that came after I tried to speak. One day in school, something even worse happened. A group of boys were speaking English for fun. I sat next to them, trying to listen. I understood nothing. One of them looked at me and said, "You don't know anything, right?" The others laughed. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. That sentence stayed with me the whole day. I didn't know anything, not even the basics. I felt like English belonged to them, and I had no right to touch it. That night, I opened my notebook and stared at the alphabet again. I wanted to quit. I asked myself, why am I trying so hard? Why am I torturing myself? I closed my notebook and went to bed with tears in my eyes. But even in the darkness, a small part of me still wanted to understand. I didn't know why. Maybe because I heard English everywhere. On TV, in songs, in signs, in movies. It was like the language was trying to call me, but I didn't know how to answer. I didn't want to feel stupid forever. I didn't want to hide every time the teacher spoke English. I didn't want to sit quietly while everyone else raised their hand. I wanted to be free. I just didn't know how to start. I remember walking to school the next morning with fear in my chest. I thought about the previous day, the mistakes, the laughter, the silence. I wondered if every day would be the same. I wondered if English would always be a monster in front of me. I wondered if I would ever feel confident, even for 1 minute. Sometimes when I looked at myself in the mirror, I asked, will I ever speak English? And there was never an answer. Just a reflection of a scared kid who wanted to run away. That was the beginning of my English journey. A journey not full of confidence and success, but full of confusion, fear, and doubt. Many people think that learning a language starts with a teacher or a textbook. For me, it started with a feeling of not wanting to be left behind, a feeling of wanting to understand the world that was happening around me, a feeling of wanting to be part of something bigger. English was not a skill, it was a door, and I was standing in front of it, too afraid to turn the handle. At that moment, I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to speak. I didn't know how to listen. I didn't know how to write. And that is okay. I want you to understand something important here. It is normal to start with nothing. It is normal to feel scared. It is normal to feel slow. Every learner has a first day, a first mistake, a first moment of fear. English does not belong to the strong or the smart. English belongs to the ones who do not stop trying. I did not know it then, but the day English made me feel small was actually the day something deep inside me began to grow. I just didn't see it yet. I thought I had reached the bottom, but I was standing at the starting line. The path ahead was long. I didn't know how many times I would fail. I didn't know how many words I would forget. I didn't know how many times I would cry. But the journey had started, and no matter how small I felt, I was already moving. That was the day English felt impossible, but that was also the day I learned something more important. My story was not over. The English that changed my life had not arrived yet. It was waiting for me, quietly, just around the corner. Chapter 2: The First Spark. A voice inside, a color. I didn't know it then, but change always starts quietly. It doesn't begin with a big moment or a perfect plan. It begins with a small feeling, like a tiny light in a dark room. For me, that light came from something simple. I was sitting at home, tired after school, not thinking about English at all. I turned on the TV, not because I wanted to learn, but because I wanted to escape. And there it was, a cartoon in English. Bright colors, simple characters, funny movements. I did not understand what they were saying, but I could feel their happiness, their energy. The characters laughed, talked, played. Their voices were warm and alive. I didn't know the words, but the sounds made me curious. I didn't run away this time. I just watched. I listened. And something inside me whispered, I want to understand this. That moment was not about school or homework or grades. It was about life. It was about connection. I didn't want to pass an exam. I didn't want to impress my teacher. I just wanted to know what those characters were saying. I wanted to be part of their world. For the first time, English did not feel like an enemy. It felt like a puzzle I wanted to solve. It was no longer a heavy book at school. It was a voice. A voice calling me forward. A voice telling me that maybe English wasn't as scary as I thought. Maybe it was just something I hadn't understood yet. The next day, I went back to school with a different feeling. I still couldn't speak. I still struggled with words. But now, I had something new in my mind. I had curiosity. I looked at the alphabet again, A, B, C, and instead of seeing meaningless shapes, I asked myself, how do these letters become words? How do words become sentences? Before, I had stared at English like a locked door. Now I was trying to find the key. Even if I could barely turn it, I still tried. And that was the difference. People think motivation is something loud and powerful. They think you wake up one day screaming, "I will become fluent alab." But real motivation is quiet. It is a soft voice inside you. It says, try again. It says, just one more step. It says, you can do better than yesterday. That voice became my friend. In class, while everyone else answered confidently, I listened to that voice. When I made mistakes, it whispered, keep going. When fear tried to choke my words, it said, say something, anything. Even when the teacher corrected me and my cheeks burned red, that voice told me, this is not the end. One afternoon, something interesting happened. I was walking home, and I heard two people speaking English in the street. They were tourists. Their voices moved smoothly, like water flowing. I didn't know most of their words, but I recognized one. It was small. A tiny word I had heard on TV, hello. They said it casually, like it was nothing. But to me it felt like magic. I repeated it in my head, then I whispered it under my breath, hello. I felt a strange warmth in my chest. I understood a word. Not because a teacher explained it, not because it was written in a textbook. I understood it because I saw it in real life. Suddenly, English was not a school subject anymore. It was a living thing, walking on the same road as me. I didn't tell anyone about that moment. It was small, but it was mine. It was like a seed planted in my brain, a seed that said, learn more. That night, I looked at my notebook, but this time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't thinking about mistakes. I wasn't thinking about other students who were better than me. I wasn't thinking about the boys who laughed. I was thinking about the word hello, the way it sounded, the way it connected people, the way it opened doors. One word, and suddenly English didn't feel like a monster. It felt like a friend I didn't know well yet. Maybe you think this is silly. One cartoon, one word, one moment. But let me tell you something, big changes come from small sparks. You don't wake up fluent. You don't jump from zero to confidence in one day. It starts slow. It starts when you watch something and don't understand, but you watch anyway. It starts when you hear a word and repeat it softly, even if you are scared. It starts when you stop fighting English and start listening to it. I began paying attention to English everywhere, on signs, on packaging, in advertisements. I would see a simple word like milk and think, so that's what it means. I wasn't studying. I wasn't memorizing. I was noticing. I was connecting English to real objects, real actions, real people. Slowly, the fear softened. It didn't disappear, but it stepped aside. My curiosity walked forward. I realized something very important. English is not learned inside your head. It grows inside your life. I know many of you feel trapped right now. You watch English videos. You repeat sentences. You study grammar lists. But when it's time to speak, your mind becomes empty. You think, English is not for me. I know that pain. I know how heavy it feels. But listen carefully. You don't hate English. You hate the feeling of being powerless. You hate the silence. You hate the embarrassment. You hate not being able to express yourself. What you really want is freedom. You want to talk. You want to understand. You want to connect. And that desire tells me something important. You already have the spark. The first spark is never dramatic. It is never perfect. It is never loud. It is a simple moment when English touches your life, and instead of running away, you stay. You listen. You try. That is when the journey truly begins. The spark tells you, you want this language. And if you want it, you can learn it. I didn't know how to study. I didn't know how to practice. I didn't have a plan. I just had curiosity. And sometimes, curiosity is stronger than fear. That quiet voice inside me kept repeating, "Don't give up." At first, I didn't believe it. But I listened anyway. I listened because I was tired of being afraid. And every time I listened, that voice grew stronger. It became the engine that pushed me forward, even when progress was slow. This was the spark that started everything. Not confidence, not vocabulary, not grammar. Just the desire to understand. And I didn't know it then, but that spark was about to take me somewhere new, somewhere bigger. Because soon, English would not stop at words. It would grow into sentences. And that is when my life began to change in a way I never expected. Chapter 3. One word changed everything. It's strange how big changes begin with something small. We imagine that learning English starts with long sentences, long rules, long lessons. But for me, it started with one word. A single word. A word so simple that most people never notice it. They hear it every day, but they don't understand the power inside it. That word was hello. I know it sounds basic. I know it is short. But the first time I understood it, truly understood it, something new opened inside me. It was like a door that had been locked for years suddenly moved. Not fully open, not completely unlocked, but the handle turned. And that movement changed everything. I didn't learn hello from a book. I didn't learn it from a dictionary. I didn't learn it from a teacher who explained pronunciation. I heard it in real life. I saw it used. I watched two people greet each other with smiles, with warmth, with connection. I didn't need to translate it. I didn't need to memorize it. I understood it because I could feel it. English was no longer just letters on a page. It was a tool, a bridge, a way for people to connect. And in that moment, I wanted that power too. For days I kept that word inside me like a secret. I whispered it to myself when no one was around. Hello, I repeated it quietly, slowly, trying to make my mouth move like the people I heard. At first it felt strange. My tongue didn't know where to go. The sound came out weak, like I was afraid of the word. But every time I whispered it, something inside me got stronger. I was still shy. I was still scared. But now I had a word. One word I could use. One word I understood. One word that belonged to me. I began to notice something interesting. I didn't understand long English sentences. I couldn't read paragraphs. I couldn't talk to people. But I could say, hello, and that made me feel different. You see, confidence doesn't start from knowing everything. It starts from knowing one small thing and using it. That is how a child learns to walk. They don't start running. They take one shaky step. They fall, they cry, they get up, and then they take another step. English learning is the same. The first step will always look small from outside, but inside your heart, it feels huge. One day, I saw my teacher walking into the classroom. I wanted to try. My hands were shaking, and my stomach hurt, but I walked to her and quietly said, "Hello." My voice trembled. I was sure she would laugh or look confused. But she smiled. A real smile. She looked at me with gentle eyes and said, "Hello, how are you?" I didn't understand the rest. My brain couldn't catch it. But it did not matter, because I had spoken. I had used English with a real human being. I didn't die. I didn't get laughed at. I didn't fail. I survived. When I sat down, I felt something new. Not proud, not strong, but alive. English wasn't something outside of me anymore. It was something I had held in my mouth, something I had spoken into the world. And for the first time I began to think, maybe I can do this. That one tiny success was stronger than all the failures before it. It was like a small sun rising inside my chest. The light was weak, but it was real. After that day, I became curious about other simple words. Not big academic ones, not words that teachers use in grammar rules. I wanted practical words. Words I could see. Words I could point at. Words that lived in my world. I looked at a book and asked myself, what do English speakers call this? I held a pen and whispered, pen. I touched a door and said, door. I repeated after TV characters. I repeated after the world around me. I didn't care if I sounded wrong. I didn't care if my accent was strange. In my mind, every word was a small victory. I didn't know it at the time, but I was doing something very powerful. I was connecting English to real life, not to textbooks, not to exams, not to fear, to life. Every time I used a word, my brain created a new path, a new connection. English was no longer floating in the air. It was sitting in my notebook, living in my room, walking with me down the street. The world became full of English, not because it changed, but because I started paying attention. People think language learning is about memorizing lists. They think it's about repeating hundreds of words until your head hurts. But the truth is simpler. You only need one word you can use, one word you understand, one word you are not afraid to speak. That single word becomes the seed. It grows roots. It finds water. It spreads branches. Soon, the tree appears, but it all starts with one seed. Maybe your first English word was different. Maybe it was hi, or thank you, or sorry. It doesn't matter. What matters is the moment you understood it, the moment it became yours. That moment is your beginning. And beginnings never look big. They look tiny, almost invisible, but they hold all the power in the world. As I learned more words, I realized something important. I didn't have to know everything. I didn't have to speak like native speakers. I didn't have to impress anyone. I just had to keep collecting the simple words I could use. Cat, dog, chair, book, apple. Each one was like a small brick, a brick that would later become a wall of sentences. The real change happened when I stopped waiting to be perfect. I didn't wait to know 50 words. I didn't wait to finish a chapter in a book. I said the words I knew, even if they were few, even if they sounded childish, even if people looked at me funny. And each time I spoke, the fear in my chest got smaller. The voice in my mind that said you can't became quiet. The voice that whispered try became louder. When I look back, it wasn't the grammar books. It wasn't the dictionaries. It wasn't the exercises in school. It was that one moment when I used one word. Hello. That word gave me permission to learn more. It gave me a small space in the English world. I had stepped inside. And once I stepped inside, I didn't want to leave. What I didn't know then was this: words were only the beginning. Soon, those words would join together. They would become short sentences. They would become communication. They would become the voice I never had. They would become the English that changed my life. Chapter 4. When Words Became Sentences. Those first words gave me hope, but they were still like lonely stars in the night sky, bright, but far apart, with darkness between them. I could say, hello. I could name objects, book, table, cat. I could repeat words I heard from cartoons or songs, but I could not connect them. I could not build meaning. I was still stuck in silence when I wanted to speak. I was like a child who knows how to hold blocks, but doesn't know how to build a house. One day, everything changed. It was a moment so simple that nobody in the room noticed it, but to me, it was like a sunrise after a long night. It happened during English class. The teacher was walking around the room, pointing to students and asking basic questions. I was terrified. Whenever she looked at me, my stomach tightened. But that day, she asked a question that was different. She pointed to my friend's pencil and said slowly, clearly, gently, "What is this?" My friend answered, "This is a pencil." The teacher smiled. She pointed to another student and asked the same question. "This is a pencil." Then she pointed to me. My mind exploded with fear. My throat felt dry. I wanted to run. But before fear could swallow me, something inside my mind whispered, "You know this. You can do this." I took a deep breath and said, "This is a pencil." Nobody laughed. Nobody stared. The teacher nodded and said, "Good. That was it. Just one sentence." But I felt like I had climbed a mountain. It was not perfect English. It was not creative. It was not poetic. But it was communication. It was meaning. It was me expressing something in English. For the first time, I was not memorizing. I was using language. I was speaking. And not in my head, not in the bathroom mirror, not in a whisper. I was speaking to real people. After class, I repeated the sentence over and over again like a person who discovered fire. "This is a pencil." I looked at my book. "This is a book." I pointed at the door. "This is a door." It felt funny at first, like I was talking to objects. But I didn't care. These sentences became small bridges that connected the words I already knew. Suddenly, words were not separate islands. They were connected by grammar, by meaning, by purpose. I began to think in little pieces. The English inside me didn't feel like a puzzle anymore. It felt like a map. I started using sentences everywhere. When I was alone in my room, I touched things and named them. "This is a bed. This is a chair. This is my notebook." I didn't do it loudly because I was shy, but even when I whispered those sentences, I felt strong. Each sentence was like a step forward, a step away from fear and closer to confidence. At school, when I saw simple things, I repeated the sentences in my mind. The world around me became a classroom. Every object became a lesson. English was no longer trapped inside the textbook. It was walking beside me. Then another thing happened, something that made my confidence grow even faster. I learned to talk about myself. The first sentence that made me feel like a real person in English was, "I am Adam." I know how simple it sounds, but when you speak your name in another language, something powerful happens. You stop being a student who memorizes. You start being a human who expresses identity. I wrote it in my notebook many times. I am Adam. I am a student. I am learning English. These sentences felt like small stones I could hold in my hand. They didn't slip away like vocabulary lists. They stayed with me. When I said, I am Adam, I wasn't just practicing grammar. I was introducing myself to English. I was telling the language that I existed, that I was here, that I wanted to grow. I didn't need long sentences. I didn't need perfect pronunciation. I just needed sentences that belonged to my life. There was no pressure to sound smart. There was no need to impress anyone. Sentences gave me structure. They gave me something solid to hold when fear tried to drown me. I started noticing patterns. I realized that English sentences were not random. They had rhythm, like music. This is a book. This is a pen. I am Adam. I am learning. The words changed, but the structure stayed. Once I understood the structure, I could replace words and create my own meaning. It was like discovering that the alphabet was not a wall, it was a set of keys. If I used them correctly, they opened new doors. At home, my parents were surprised. They heard me saying English sentences to myself. They didn't understand all the words, but they saw something new in my eyes' determination. They asked me, "What are you doing?" I told them, "I am practicing." Those were my first four-word English sentences. I am practicing. And I was. Not because someone forced me, not because I had homework. I practiced because the language had become personal. It was not a school subject anymore. It was part of my identity. I made mistakes, many mistakes. Sometimes I said, "He is pencil." Sometimes I forgot words. Sometimes I mixed grammar. But something important changed. I was no longer afraid to be wrong. When I messed up, I corrected myself and tried again. Every mistake taught me something new. I learned that mistakes are not signs of weakness. They are signs of progress. They show you are moving. They show you are trying. One afternoon, my teacher caught me speaking sentences quietly to myself. She asked me to say one out loud. I said, "This is my book." She nodded and said, "Yes, good." Then she added, "Now tell me, whose book is this?" My brain froze. I didn't know. I stared at the desk. The room went silent. Then she said slowly, "This is your book." I repeated it. "This is your book." She smiled again. I didn't know it then, but she had given me another key, the key of ownership. Suddenly I could talk about things that belonged to me, to others, to the world around me. English was not just naming things anymore, it was describing life. That day I walked home with a strange feeling in my chest. I noticed everything around me. The road, the sun, the cars, the trees. I whispered, "This is a tree. This is the road. This is my bag." The people on the street probably thought I was talking to myself, but I didn't care. For the first time, English felt like a companion, not a cold teacher, not a scary subject, a companion. That was when I realized something powerful. Sentences are not about grammar, they are about freedom. When you can speak a sentence, even a simple one, you can tell the world who you are, what you see, what you feel, and what you want. You can ask, you can answer, you can live. English was no longer a mountain I could not climb, it became a staircase. One step at a time, one sentence at a time, I was moving upward. I didn't know what was coming next. I didn't know how many more mistakes I would make. I didn't know how many times I would fall. But one thing became clear to me. Words were no longer enough. I needed sentences. And those sentences were about to lead me into something even bigger, something that would change my world completely. Because soon, English would stop being something I practiced. It would become something I lived. Chapter 5. English became part of my world. Sentences gave me a voice, but that voice was still small. It was like a candle in a dark room. It lit a little space around me, but most of the world was still in shadow. I wanted more light. I wanted English to stop being something I used only in class or in notebooks. I wanted it to live with me, to follow me, to walk beside me. That was when something quietly powerful happened. English started entering my daily life. It did not happen suddenly. There was no big moment, no speech, no applause. It started with something simple. One afternoon, I looked at my phone and realized I always used it in my native language. Every menu, every setting, every notification. It was the world I was comfortable with. But comfort was not helping me grow. I took a deep breath and changed the language of my phone to English. The screen looked strange, unfamiliar, like a different planet. Words I had never seen before, settings, updates, storage, notifications. It was scary, but exciting. I touched each icon like a child learning how to walk. I didn't understand everything, but I did not switch back. That single decision changed more than I knew. Now English was not a school subject. It was the way my phone spoke to me. Every time I opened it, I had to read English. I could not escape it. When the battery was low, it said power saver. When a message arrived, it said new notification. When I got a call, it said incoming call. These tiny phrases taught me more than any textbook had done. I was learning English not because I wanted to, but because my life was forcing me to. And strangely, it didn't feel like torture. It felt like living. Then another thing happened. I was sitting in my room staring at my journal. I had been writing small English sentences, but I stopped after a few days because they felt boring. One night, I had a different idea. I started labeling the objects in my room with English names. I wrote desk on a small paper and stuck it on my desk. I wrote door and taped it on the door. I wrote chair and placed it on the chair. It looked silly. My family laughed the first time they saw it, but I didn't care, because every time I walked into the room, English greeted me. Every time I sat down, English sat beside me. My room became my classroom. My home became my teacher. I began to see English everywhere. When I ate breakfast, I read the words on cereal boxes. When I walked outside, I read signs. When I was stuck in traffic, I looked at shop names, advertisements, numbers. Things that had no meaning to me before suddenly became lessons. I realized that English was not hiding. I had simply never looked for it. Once I opened my eyes, it was everywhere. I also changed the way I watched TV. Before, I only watched in my own language because it was easier. But one day, I decided to watch cartoons in English. Not movies, not complicated dramas, just cartoons. The characters spoke slowly, clearly, with simple expressions. I didn't understand every word, but I understood enough to follow the story. Sometimes I paused scenes just to repeat sentences. The first time I did it, I felt embarrassed, like I was talking to a screen. But after a while, it became normal. I would watch a scene, repeat it, and listen, then repeat it again. That small habit became one of the strongest tools in my learning. In the evenings, I started listening to English songs. I didn't care about grammar, I didn't care about meaning. I just listened. The rhythm helped me. The pronunciation became softer, easier on my tongue. Sometimes I sang along even though I didn't know what the lyrics meant. And then one day, I began to understand small lines. Just a few words here and there. Not full sentences, just fragments. But those fragments told me something important. My brain was changing. I was not forcing English in anymore. It was flowing in naturally, like water finding new paths. Reading also changed. I stopped trying to read big grammar books that made me sleepy. I started reading children's books. the kind with pictures and simple words. I read slowly, like a baby. Sometimes I repeated the sentences out loud. Sometimes I didn't understand the meaning, so I used the picture to guess. I didn't worry about being wrong. I didn't punish myself. Each page was a small step. I didn't read because someone told me to. I read because I wanted to know what happened next. That curiosity pulled me forward when my confidence tried to pull me back. Something strange and beautiful happened next. I began thinking in English. Not full thoughts, not long sentences, just small pieces. When I saw a cat on the street, my mind didn't say the word in my native language, it said cat. When I drank water, I whispered water. When I picked up my phone, I thought message. My brain was switching slowly. I didn't plan it, I didn't force it. It just happened because English was no longer something outside of me. It was around me, inside me, touching every corner of my day. My friends noticed the change. They said, "Why do you watch English cartoons?" Or "Why is your phone in English?" Some laughed, some didn't understand. But I realized something powerful. People who don't grow will never understand why others try to grow. They stay in their comfort zone. They stay in their bubble. They think you are strange because you want more from yourself. But inside, I felt brave. I wasn't trying to impress them. I was trying to change myself. Was it easy? Not at all. There were days when I felt stupid again. Days when I forgot sentences. Days when my brain refused to understand anything. Days when I asked myself, why am I doing this? But every time I felt weak, I remembered one simple truth. I wanted English to be part of my world. And when something becomes part of your world, you can't walk away from it. You wake up with it. You sleep with it. You grow with it. That period of my life was important because it taught me a lesson many learners never discover. And you don't learn English only in a classroom. You learn English when you let it enter your life. The world itself becomes your teacher. Your room becomes your textbook. Your phone becomes your dictionary. The songs you listen to become your speaking practice. The cartoons become your listening partner. And slowly, gently, without pressure, English becomes a friend. Not a monster, not a test, a friend. I did not know it at the time, but that friendship was preparing me for something even deeper. Because soon, I would meet someone who changed not only my English, but also my belief in myself. Someone who showed me that learning a language is not just about words and sentences. It is about courage, mistakes, and trust. And that person, that support, would change everything. Chapter 6. The person who believed in me. There comes a moment in every learner's journey when something outside of grammar, vocabulary, or practice changes everything. It is not a book, not a movie, not a classroom. It is a person. One human being who looks at you differently. One voice that says, "You are not bad. You are not slow. You are not hopeless." I was lucky enough to meet that person at a time when I felt weak, lost, and ready to quit. It was an afternoon like any other. I was sitting at my desk after school. My notebook was open, but I wasn't writing. I was staring at the words I had written earlier. This is a book. I am Adam. This is my desk. The sentences looked small and useless. I felt like I wasn't improving. My classmates could already speak faster. They could understand movies. They could answer quickly in class. I was still stuck with simple sentences. I thought, maybe I'm just not meant for this. That thought hurt more than any mistake I had ever made. My English teacher noticed I was quiet. She walked toward my desk slowly. I expected her to scold me or ask why I wasn't doing my work. Instead, she sat beside me and spoke softly. "I see you trying," she said. I looked up, surprised. Nobody had ever said that to me. They always said, "Study more," or "Practice harder," or "Don't be lazy." But this teacher didn't see laziness in my eyes. She saw effort. She saw the fear behind my silence. She asked me to read a few sentences. My voice was shaking. I read very slowly, trying not to make a mistake. When I finished, I waited for her to correct me, to tell me everything I said wrong. But she only said, "Good. Your pronunciation will get better with time. Keep speaking." That one word, "good," changed something in my heart. I didn't feel stupid. I didn't feel ashamed. I felt seen. And that feeling was powerful. After class, she stopped me and asked, "Do you really want to learn English?" I looked at her and nodded. My voice didn't come out, but my eyes said yes. She smiled and told me a sentence I still remember. "If you want to learn, I will help you." No teacher had ever said such words to me before. I didn't know how to respond. I just stood there, silent, holding my notebook tightly. She began to help me after class, not with complicated grammar, not with long lessons. She helped me with simple things: how to say greetings, how to describe objects, how to speak about myself. She didn't laugh at my mistakes. She didn't rush me. She spoke slowly and clearly. When I said something wrong, she didn't say, "No, that's wrong." Instead, she repeated the correct version gently so I could hear the difference. That kindness made me brave. I wasn't afraid to speak around her. For the first time in my life, I looked at English not as an exam, not as a subject, but as a bridge. A bridge between who I was and who I could become. My teacher didn't only teach me English, she taught me something more important. Mistakes do not mean failure. Mistakes mean you are trying. I remember one day she asked me to speak about my weekend. My heart raced. I had never spoken about something personal in English before. My mind felt empty. I stuttered, go, park. She smiled and said, "I went to the park." I repeated, "I went to the park." The sentence felt heavy in my mouth, but she clapped her hands and said, "Perfect. That's it." She didn't care that it was small. She cared that I spoke. She cared that I tried. And that encouragement gave me the courage to try again. I began to feel different. I no longer walked into English class like a soldier going to war. I walked in like a person who wanted to learn. When I didn't understand something, I didn't hide behind silence. I asked questions. I said, "Teacher, what does this mean?" She always explained with patience. She always made me feel like my question mattered, and slowly, I started believing in myself. Outside the classroom, her words followed me. When I practiced alone, I imagined her saying, "Good." When I hesitated, I imagined her saying, "Keep speaking." Her voice became the voice inside my head. When I made mistakes, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt curious. Instead of running away from English, I began running toward it. Sometimes she shared stories about students who struggled at first, students who couldn't say a single sentence but later became confident speakers. She told me about her own difficulties learning another language. She did this not because she had to, but because she wanted me to understand something. You are not alone. I learned something very important from her. English is not only learned with books, it is learned with people. When someone believes in you, your brain opens, your heart relaxes, and learning becomes a joy instead of a fight. I never understood why students say I hate English, but I do understand why they say it. They hate feeling stupid. They hate feeling judged. They hate feeling alone in their mistakes. My teacher removed that pain from me. She didn't tell me I was talented. She didn't tell me I was special. She told me I was capable, and that was enough. One day, something happened that showed me how far I had come. She asked a question to the whole class, and before I could stop myself, my hand went up. It didn't rise like a confident student. It rose like a child who discovered courage for the first time. When she called on me, I spoke. Not perfectly, not fluently, but clearly enough. The room didn't explode in laughter like before. Nobody giggled. Nobody looked shocked. And when I finished, I saw her smile. Not just a small smile, a proud one. That moment taught me something I will never forget. Confidence is not born inside your brain. It is given to you by someone who believes in you, and then you learn to believe in yourself. Without her, I might have quit. I might have stayed silent forever. I might have believed I was too slow, too weak, too shy. But one person saw my effort. She saw the fire inside me when I didn't even know it existed. And because she believed in me, I began to believe in myself. That belief became the fuel that pushed me forward. I wasn't just learning words anymore. I wasn't just memorizing sentences. I was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone braver, someone who could see a future where English was not a wall, but a door. And soon, I would learn something even more powerful, something that would change not just my English, but my entire identity. Because no matter how strong one person's belief is, there comes a day when you hit a wall that feels impossible, a wall that almost breaks you, a wall that makes you question everything you've learned. I met that wall too, and it nearly stopped me. Chapter 7: The Wall That Almost Broke Me. Everything was going well. I was speaking more. I was understanding more. I was writing simple sentences in my journal. My teacher was proud of me. My friends even asked me for help sometimes. I felt like English was finally becoming my friend. But that is the strange thing about growth. Just when you start feeling strong, life tests you. It shows you the next mountain, bigger than anything you have climbed before. I didn't know it was coming. I didn't know how to handle it. And when it arrived, it felt like hitting a wall. The first signs were small. I would try to speak, and the words would get stuck. I would try to read a paragraph, and suddenly my mind would go blank. I had learned many words, but I couldn't remember them when I needed them. My sentences became slow again. I felt like I was walking backward. I thought, what is happening? Why am I getting worse? At school, other students seemed to improve quickly. Their sentences flowed, their vocabulary grew. They joked in English, while I sat quietly, staring at the floor. The fear I thought I had defeated came back and wrapped itself around my throat. I could not breathe. I could not speak. I remember the day it hit me hardest. The teacher asked the class to talk about a movie they liked. I had practiced a few sentences at home. I had even rehearsed them in front of the mirror. But when she called my name, everything disappeared. The classroom lights felt too bright. The wall behind her looked too close. My hands became cold. My heart beat so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Just air, just silence. I looked around and saw my classmates watching me. And at that moment, the old voice returned, the one I had fought so hard to bury. You will never speak English. I sat down without saying anything. The teacher didn't scold me. She didn't laugh. She just continued the lesson. But inside, I was broken. I felt weak. I felt useless. I walked home slowly that day, like every step was heavy. When I reached my room, I closed the door and threw my notebook on the bed. I lay down and stared at the ceiling. For the first time, I seriously thought about quitting. I thought, maybe I am not meant to learn a language. Maybe English is only for smart people. Maybe I will always be silent. I imagine some of you have felt this too, like something is wrong with you, like everyone else has a secret you don't know. That night I didn't practice. I didn't watch cartoons. I didn't read anything. I closed my eyes and wished English would disappear from my life. But here is what life does when we feel hopeless. It waits. It does not push us. It does not shout at us. It waits quietly until we stand up again. And after a few days, I did. Not because I felt strong, not because I felt confident. I stood up because I was tired of being scared. I was tired of running away. I opened my notebook again, with shaking hands, and I looked at the sentences I had written before. This is my book. I am learning English. They looked small, but they reminded me that I had already changed once. If I had changed before, why couldn't I change again? Then I noticed something I had ignored. I was trying to climb too fast. I had stopped reviewing old words. I wanted long sentences. I wanted complex phrases. I wanted to impress people. But English doesn't grow like that. You don't plant seeds today and pick fruit tomorrow. You water, you wait, you repeat. My teacher once told me something. When you feel stuck, don't look for new words. Go back to the old ones. I used to think that advice was simple, but now I realized it was wisdom. So I went back. I returned to basic sentences. I spoke them out loud again. I am Adam, this is a pen. I went to school. It felt embarrassing, like I was a beginner again. But slowly, something changed. The fear became smaller, the words returned. My mind became calm. I was rebuilding my foundation, brick by brick. And that foundation was stronger than the first one, because this time I understood something. English is not a race, it is a relationship. Sometimes the relationship is easy, sometimes it is difficult, but if you stay with it, it grows. During this time, I discovered another truth. Improvement is not a straight line, it is not always up, up, up. Sometimes it goes up, then down, then up, then down again. But every time you continue, every time you don't quit, you grow stronger, even if you don't see it. It's like climbing stairs in the dark. You don't know how many steps you've climbed until suddenly, the light appears. I started practicing in small ways. I spoke to myself while brushing my teeth. I described things in English while walking outside. I repeated sentences from songs. I didn't force myself. I didn't chase perfection. I just kept the language alive inside me. Some days were better, some days were worse, but I did not stop. One day, something unexpected happened. I was sitting in class when the teacher asked another student a question. They struggled, they searched for words, they made mistakes, but they kept trying. Suddenly I realized something important. I was not alone. Everyone was fighting their own battle. Some people looked confident, but they were just hiding their fear. Some people spoke fast, but they didn't understand deeply. Every person in that room was climbing their own staircase. That realization changed everything. I didn't have to be perfect, I just had to keep climbing. I wish I could tell you that after that, everything was easy. It wasn't. I still had bad days, I still made mistakes. But the wall that once scared me became something different. It became a test, a sign, a quiet voice that whispered, "You are growing." Because you only hit a wall when you've already walked far. You only feel stuck when you have moved forward. You only doubt yourself when you care enough to want more. The wall almost broke me, but it also taught me the most important lesson of all: never stop just because progress becomes slow. Fluency is not fireworks, it is a slow sunrise. First darkness, then a thin light, then more, until suddenly the whole sky is bright. And that slow sunrise was preparing me for the final transformation, the moment when I stopped learning English and began living it, when I stopped memorizing words and began becoming English. Because the English that changed my life was still waiting for me. Chapter 8. I didn't learn English. I became English. There comes a moment in every learner's journey when you stop collecting English like coins in your pocket, and you begin wearing it like a part of your skin. You stop feeling like a visitor in the language, and you start living inside it. For me, this moment didn't arrive in one day. It didn't arrive with a certificate, or a teacher's praise, or a perfect test score. It arrived slowly, like morning sunlight touching the world without making noise. It arrived the day I realized something powerful. I was not learning English anymore. I was becoming English. I didn't notice it at first. The change was invisible. I was on my way to school, walking down the street when a woman passed by speaking on her phone in English. Normally, I would hear a few sounds and ignore the rest, but this time I understood most of what she was saying. Not because I was trying, not because I was translating, simply because my brain did not treat English as a foreign visitor anymore. It treated it as a familiar friend. I kept walking, thinking about nothing special, until suddenly the truth hit me. I had understood without effort. I didn't stop moving, but inside, I froze. The world felt different. That day, I sat in English class with a new feeling in my chest. I was not afraid. When the teacher spoke, I listened. Not with fear, not with confusion, with curiosity, like someone who wanted to learn more, not someone who was terrified of being wrong. When she asked questions, I didn't ask myself, what if I fail? I asked myself, how can I say this clearly? It wasn't a battle anymore. It was communication. It was connection. I started noticing English outside the classroom. I saw signs I had passed 100 times, but now they made sense. I read labels on products. I read advertisements. I listened to conversations in the market or on the bus. Sometimes I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough. That was the difference. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. English was no longer something I needed to chase. It had become a part of me. The biggest moment of change happened when I stopped thinking in my native language before speaking. I didn't translate. I didn't hesitate. The sentences just flowed. One afternoon, a tourist asked me for directions. Normally, I would panic and run away. But this time, without thinking, I said, "Go straight and turn left at the next street." The words came naturally, as if they were waiting in my mouth. I didn't think about grammar. I didn't think about pronunciation. I answered like I was speaking in my own language. After the tourist thanked me and walked away, I stood there silently, shocked. My heart was calm. No fear, no shaking, just a quiet feeling inside. I can speak. That was the moment everything changed. Not because I suddenly became fluent like a native speaker, not because I had learned thousands of words, but because I stopped being scared of English. I stopped treating it like a stranger. I stopped trying to memorize it. Instead, I lived with it. I spoke with it. I made mistakes with it. I laughed with it. I cried with it. I dreamed in it. I became it. I began using English for real things in my life. When I wanted to search for something online, I typed in English. When I watched videos, I didn't look for subtitles. When I wrote messages to friends, I used English sentences. At first they were short, then longer. Soon, I was writing paragraphs. I wasn't copying anyone. I wasn't reading from a script. I was expressing myself. The language that once suffocated me became the language that helped me breathe. I started understanding something deep. Fluency is not when you stop making mistakes. Fluency is when mistakes don't stop you. I still said the wrong word sometimes. I still forgot grammar sometimes. I still spoke slowly sometimes. But I didn't feel embarrassed. I didn't feel stupid. I didn't feel like a child. I felt human. I felt alive. I felt strong. I realized that fluent speakers are not perfect speakers. They are fearless speakers. People often think English is only about words and sentences. It is not. It is about identity. It is about who you become when you stop hiding and start speaking. When I spoke English, I became a different version of myself. Braver, more confident, more open. The language gave me a voice I never had. It helped me say things that were stuck inside me for years. It helped me meet new people, understand new cultures, and feel part of the world. Sometimes, I look back at the scared child in classroom who couldn't read a single sentence. I remember the fear in his eyes. I remember how heavy his heart felt. He thought English was impossible. He thought he would never speak. He thought he was not good enough. But that child didn't know something important. There is no such thing as someone who cannot learn English. There is only someone who stops trying too early. I didn't have a special gift. I wasn't born talented. I wasn't the smartest kid. I wasn't the fastest learner. I didn't master grammar in 1 week. I didn't memorize 10,000 words. I just didn't quit. I kept going even when I was slow. I kept speaking even when I made mistakes. I kept trying even when people laughed. I kept pushing even when fear froze my tongue. I didn't need to be perfect. I only needed to be honest with myself. If you are listening to this and you feel scared, or slow, or lost, remember this. English is not a subject. It is a journey. Some days you walk, some days you crawl, some days you fall. But every day you keep moving, you change. Not just your words, your mind, your heart, your confidence, your future, your whole life. The English that changed my life was not a dictionary, not a textbook, not a grammar rule. It was the moment I decided English was part of me. I didn't study to impress teachers. I didn't practice to look smart. I learned because I wanted to live. I learned because I wanted freedom. I learned because I wanted to speak. And now, as I speak to you, I want to tell you something simple but powerful. You don't learn English to become perfect. You learn English to become yourself in a bigger world. That was the English that changed my life. If you let it, it can change yours too. If this story touched your heart and helped you, subscribe to the channel, like this video and comment below. What part of my English journey feels like your own? Your journey is just beginning. Keep going. You can do it.